Super Bowl city long before the dome graced our skyline.
As Rob Messon reports, older sports fans still have fond memories of Tulane Stadium.
You know, when you think about it, 81,000 people conversion on a residential area.
It towered over Tulane's campus, an open-air stadium built in 1926 known as the Queen Stadium of the South.
Tulane Stadium was a national treasure.
Tulane Stadium, which sat roughly where Ullman Stadium is now, was the longtime home of Tulane football, the Sugar Bowl, and the first home of the New Orleans Saints.
It's a huge stadium. In those 80,000-seat stadium in the South, nobody else had stadiums that large.
Okay, Bill Fleming. Well, you're looking at New Orleans, Louisiana.
Before Super Bowls, College Bowl games were the biggest in football, and the Sugar Bowl was one of the top four.
Here comes Al, the king of New Orleans.
The Sugar Bowl committee paid for the expansion twice.
Expansions at Tulane Stadium were the fuel which led to the founding of the Saints in 1967.
The NFL was looking around, and one of the facts was we had a stadium large enough, a professionally sized stadium, Tulane Stadium, that could host the Saints.
Tulane Stadium hosted 3 Super Bowls before the Superdome was built. The first was Super Bowl IV, which pitted the AFL Kansas City Chiefs against the NFL Minnesota Vikings. When the Chiefs won in their second Super Bowl appearance, it changed NFL history. It cemented the AFL's reputation as a viable pro football league, leading to a merger of the AFL and the NFL.
1970, it's Minnesota versus Kansas City. Very, very cold.
As a teen, Superdome announcer Mark Romig attended the first New Orleans Super Bowl at Tulane with his dad, who was the Saints' first stadium announcer, and was hired to do the in-stadium call of the first New Orleans Super Bowl.
Super Bowl back then, it was really just the day of the game, and that was all to it. There may have been a party the night before, but it was not like what you see now.
That game featured a Chiefs coach who would later coach the Saints.
Hank Stram was so confident, you know, and he was like a little peacock strutting around.
Tulane alum and former Times-Picayune columnist Angus Lind grew up near Tulane Stadium and has a lifetime of memories.
That was the picture on page 1 of the Stateside. Dallas Cowgirls in town for Super Bowl.
Lind met his wife while reporting on Super Bowl VI. She was a Dallas native who came to New Orleans to watch her beloved Cowboys beat the Dolphins in 1972, Tulane's second Super Bowl, and a courtship began.
I said, well, look, I'd like to marry you. And she said, so would I.
Angus and Ann have now been married 52 years. The first 3 New Orleans Super Bowls aren't the only history made at Tulane Stadium.
Here's the snap, the ball is down, Dempsey kicks, it's on the way, it is!
Former Saints kicker Tom Dempsey earned his place in the NFL record books when he nailed a 63-yard field goal. That record was unmatched for 28 years.
Tulane Stadium has a soft place in a lot of our hearts.
4 years I played for the Saints in Tulane Stadium. It was always kind of a happening, and Al Hurt was playing and shooting people out of cannons. And I didn't really see all that. We're trying to play a football game, but it was exciting.
Saints legend Archie Manning threw hundreds of passes in Tulane before he and the Saints moved to the Superdome. After the dome was built, weather would never again be a factor in a New Orleans pro football game. Tulane was on its way out. Demolition was completed in 1980, 4 years after the dome was built.
It started coming down, and that was probably one of the lowest points in my life. I was just sad. You know, I salvaged a couple of bricks.
It has been more than 40 years since Tulane Stadium was torn down here on Tulane's campus, and looking back, it's hard to imagine just how dominant that facility was here in the uptown landscape and in the hearts and minds of thousands of New Orleanians.
I think there's people that still mourn the loss of Tulane Stadium, the old Tulane Stadium.
In fact, Tulane students were reluctant to leave.
The students actually went to the old stadium during the first game and sat there while Tulane was playing in the Superdome. They moved the sticks and chains and had the radio feed, and the 2 Tulane students didn't want to move.
Tulane fan Vince Liberto has fond memories of football heroics in the famed arena and owns a piece of it.
Like the piece of wood And this is a piece of the original Tulane Stadium. You can imagine if this tells stories.
Stories of sports heroes, athletic rivalries, and the first 3 New Orleans Super Bowls, which helped fuel the economy while changing the course of New Orleans sports history and the history of the National Football League.
That was Rob Masson reporting. This will be New Orleans' 11th Super Bowl, tied with Miami for the most of any city. This will be the 8th one played in the Dome.